Hi everybody, it's Ajanette and I am here to finish up your last lecture on personality theory, chapter 11. We left off talking about Carl Jung and I mentioned that he really does talk about the importance of both our conscious and unconscious processes. Our unconscious processes include not just the unconscious we develop from our own personal experiences, but also the collective unconscious we inherit from our ancestors that include archetypes, and they can drive our behavior. So I kind of find it to be all fascinating and similar to the concept of genetic inheritance of personality. So it's really interesting to me that he had kind of a concept of this mechanism long before we ever had any biological proof that it existed. That being said, he really talked about the importance of balancing introversion and extroversion, and this concept of introvert and extrovert really relates to kind of our social energy and interaction and how we're motivated around others. And introverts get energy from being by themselves. They usually solve problems well on their own. Extroverts really get energy from being around other people. They're more productive working with others. They're happier when they're around other people. And they usually find more creativity, and that's a source of outlet. A good source of energy and an outlet for them. Carl Jung really did talk about the importance of authenticity, and he said that we often have this persona that we put out to the world, and it's a mask, and that mask is both conscious experiences and our unconscious, that we've inherited. We have these fears of being vulnerable in front of other people, and so this persona may hinder that authenticity and hinder us from developing genuine, authentic relationships. And as long as we hide behind that mask, we're going to have a hard time truly finding intimacy and connection with other human beings. So, again, this notion of introversion and extroversion, and I think it's really important to recognize kind of where you land, and it's really not just being about being a social butterfly. It's really about where does your motivation and energy come from, and when are you most productive, and when are you at your peak, more so than your social engagement and interaction. So another theorist is Karen Horney, not Horney, her name is Horney, and she was our first woman psychoanalyst, which is really important. She really did not like the concept of penis envy that Freud proposed, suggesting that little girls are envious that they don't have penises, because somehow in his era, men were perceived as being superior to women, and so having a penis somehow made you superior. She suggested maybe it's the other way around. Maybe I'm not envious of your penis, but you're envious of my womb, and that's pretty revolutionary. Consider her a pioneer of the feminist movement. The womb is a very powerful source of life, and you should Google Betty White's talk on strength and the womb and the uterus. It's, vagina in particular, is pretty interesting. Anyway, she talked about this concept of self-realization and awareness, and how we really need to kind of understand ourselves in order for us to move forward toward positive and healthy growth in our lives. She did believe personality was shaped by our childhood, but it's not necessarily fixed and dictated from childhood. We can have self-awareness and recognition to move toward positive growth, but if we don't take that time to invest in our own self-analysis, then we might be victims of our parenting, and sometimes really poor parenting. Those of us that maybe didn't have the best childhood or background, maybe we developed a sense of helplessness or powerlessness or insecurity or an anxiety. Whatever our dysfunction was may have contributed to negative feelings, and those negative feelings kind of manifest themselves in you. And in order to cope, you can kind of take one of three approaches. First, you can move toward people. So you're really seeking other people's affection and acceptance, and you want to be connected to others. So unfortunately, you can be overly dependent and needy of other people's approval. You can also move away from people where you're kind of putting a little bit of the walls up and you want to be independent and I'm private and I'm self-reliant and I don't need anybody else. But at the same time, because that wall's up, you're isolating yourself from others, you're being very detached, and you're not developing healthy, intimate connections with other people. And then a third way that you might respond to these insecurities is you might move against people and clash with people and have conflict and control issues where you have to dominate and you have to be the one that is on top and has all the power, and that might cause you to be aggressive or manipulative in your relationships, again hindering true, authentic, intimate relationships. The best approach is to kind of find that balance, right? And to recognize where your insecurities are, realize those, and kind of work on those so you can have healthy, balanced relationships. The behavioral perspective is a spinoff of the chapter 6 that we talked about from learning theory. Two common faces that you see are B.F. Skinner from his operant conditioning and Albert Bandura from the Bobo doll experiment and social learning theory. As far as personality goes, Skinner was very much a devout behaviorist, and he believed 100% the environment shapes your personality and your behavior. And we learn to behave a certain way based on those consequences. Positive consequences or favorable, desirable consequences will lead to increases in those behaviors that elicit those consequences. And he suggested that our personality does change over time because we're exposed to new environmental experiences and consequences, so our personality will be influenced and shaped by those evolving consequences. Albert Bandura in his social learning theory, again, he's not a pure behaviorist in that he does believe that our cognitions play a role and how we perceive and interpret our interactions with others influences our personality. And he talked about the importance of self-efficacy, which is a sense of self-competence, which is different than self-esteem. Self-esteem looks at how we value ourselves, but self-efficacy looks at whether we believe in our abilities to accomplish a task or overcome challenges. So it's more of a confidence in your own ability or competence. Somebody that has high self-efficacy has a sense that I can do this, I can overcome. So it's a very empowered perspective. He also emphasized the notion of reciprocal determinism, where it's not just our cognitions or our beliefs that influence our personalities, it's not just our environment that influences, but also our behaviors. So they all kind of influence and work together. How I interpret things happening in my environment are going to influence my behavior. How I behave might influence my environment. So they all kind of work together to shape our personality. And then also our personality can be shaped again by role models because we learn vicariously from watching others. So birds of a feather flock together, so to speak, or you are what you eat, you are what you hang around with. And so I heard a quote, and I don't remember who it was. I want to say Einstein, but I'm not positive. But it said, you are the average of the sum of the 5 people you interact with most in the world. And so this kind of goes along with Bandura's philosophy. And so I ask you, who are you spending your time with? And is that the kind of person you want to be? Surround yourself with role models and with people that you want to aspire to be more like. And then it's kind of helping guide you in that direction. So overall, social cognitive theories really believe our personalities are shaped from both our interactions with others, and our cognitive factors, our individual perceptions and belief systems, and how we interpret those interactions. Julian Rotter is a social cognitive theorist, and he really talked about these expectancies. And there are expectations. What do we expect to come out of a situation? What do we expect our ability to be? What do we expect the outcome to be. And those expectations, kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, will influence the outcome, and they influence your behavior, and therefore that influences the outcome. So he really emphasized the importance of this locus of control, and who's in control of your circumstances. People with an external locus of control don't believe that they're in control. They kind of think that things are up to fate or destiny or some other person. It's outside of them. And people with an internal locus of control truly believe in their own sense of empowerment and influence in circumstances. People with internal locus of control typically have healthier personalities. When you interview the Fortune 500 CEOs, they typically have an internal locus of control where they feel like, yes, luck can influence certain opportunities, but ultimately you're in control of your destiny. And that's something I subscribe to, and so I encourage you to look at that within yourself. Finally, Michelle talked about personality as being situational. We've talked about it in terms of being this pervasive, stable quality, but it can be situational, and this is definitely true for me, where people think I'm really outgoing and dynamic. You see me in a classroom environment, and that may be the case. I have strong public speaking skills, but really, on a personal level, I'm not an extrovert at all. I'm not outgoing. I'm kind of shy and awkward and uncomfortable. At a party, I sit at the table next to the food buffet. I don't like to go and network and work the room. But when I'm representing my company or the school or a class, then I can be very extroverted. So I get the situational component. Self-regulation or willpower is a really important component of personality, because we have to identify a set of goals in our lives, and then we have to have the willpower to push our behavior toward achieving those goals. And again, that internal or external locus of control can influence that as well. He also studied self-regulation. He's famous for the famous marshmallow test, where he put marshmallows in front of children, and he basically tested their willpower. And what he found was that most people are going to eat the marshmallow. Even if you tell them, well, if you don't eat the marshmallow now, you can have 3 marshmallows in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. We kind of look at the immediate situation, and if we perceive the situation as not having favorable outcomes for ourselves, then we have no self-regulation, and we're going to just act on impulse right then and there. So willpower is a critical component of self-regulation, and again, that positive perception can influence our willpower. Okay. And then finally, there's our humanistic perspectives, which are my favorite. Again, furthering that perspective of you're in control of your destiny. Abraham Maslow really talked about the hierarchy of needs, and our personality is a quest to fulfill the basic biological, physiological drives. And ultimately, we're striving towards self-actualization and becoming the best that we're capable of being. We have this inborn drive to be better and to aspire toward growth. He said that's an ongoing process throughout our lives. Everyone is involved or participating in this hierarchy of needs, and we're all striving to be better, but few people actually achieve self-actualization. And then there's Carl Rogers, who really talked about the importance of self-concept and this ideal self, that it's the best self that we can imagine ourselves to be, who we want to be, and then our real self is who we actually are. And if those two things don't align with one another, it can cause some poor adjustment challenges or emotional challenges. If your ideal self and real self align with one another, if your self-concept and experience align with one another, then it's a very positive outcome, and you can be a healthy, well-adjusted person. Ultimately, we need unconditional positive regard, and that's where people value us. There's no conditions or contingencies upon that value, or our value as a human being is separate from that of our behavior. We can make mistakes but still be inherently valuable. And when you give someone unconditional positive regard, and that unconditional acceptance, they're more capable of achieving a healthy self-concept. So There's just a couple more theories left, and I'm going to stop there, and then I'll be back to wrap those up.